I'm not trying to pick on Bret Hart, and I know that he has some super fans who maybe hate listening to you discuss your time with him occasionally, but Bret's in the news in a major way this week. He recently made an appearance on the Johnny I Pro show, and I guess he spoke his mind about a lot of different topics and different subjects, and I wanted to get your reaction to some of these. He said that he had a hard time watching today's pro wrestling because it's just too fake for him. Quote, I'll be honest, I have a hard time watching today's wrestling. I just can't really watch it. It's too fake for me. But I love watching the old 90s wrestling. Like when I watch my matches back or almost in any match, even obscure Stampede wrestling matches, there's something about the realism, the punches, the kicks, and even just the way the presentation is. It just seems to me to be more onus put on the workmanship of learning the craft of being wrestlers. So Bret's not a fan of modern wrestling. I guess that shouldn't be a surprise. He's kind of old school. Is that part of the business though, that it always has to evolve? I mean, it feels like Bret himself would have had a lot of respect for a guy like Dynamite Kid. And I got to think that older folks in that generation, the legends of that generation would say, oh, he's going too fast and needs to slow down. And does it always have to evolve?
That perspective that we just heard from Bret I've heard it for the 35 years that I've been professionally associated with the business. When I first broke in 87, I would listen to Ray the Crippler Stevens, Wahoo McDaniel. Greg was in on those conversations, but he really wasn't, their peer in terms of, when those guys broke into the business. But Ray Stevens, Wahoo McDaniel, occasionally Vern would sit on those meetings. Nick Bockwinkel would sit in on those, and these were after work, right? These are sitting around having a beer after the day's done. And that's all I heard when I first broke into the business. These young guys, and of course they report, in fact, specifically talking about Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty, the Midnight Rockers, who were an AWA attraction at that time. I booked them in Mason City, Iowa, the first event I ever promoted. I promoted the Midnight Rockers, by the way. Little tidbit, if you will. I'm in a dusty frame of mind. I guess it's Thanksgiving. But I heard those conversations talking about Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty. And then when I got to WCW, I'd listen to the older guys there. Oh, geez. Ole Anderson was the worst because he was almost violent about it. He'd get himself so worked up talking about it. He'd end up punching walls and kicking desks. And he was, took it a little too far sometimes. But it was the same tone. Oh, today's wrestlers, if they would just go back and look at some of the old tapes from some of the old guys. And I'm not saying what Bret's perspective is wrong necessarily. It's subjective. The industry has changed. The music industry has changed. The film industry has changed. The television industry has changed. Every form of media that we consume as entertainment or even information has changed. And some people just hold on a little more than others. And I get it. A large part of me agrees with Bret. I just don't have any problem going, yeah, well, that was in my era, but now things are different, and finding ways to enjoy what's current. Because otherwise you're just hanging on to the past. You're hanging on to a memory. Quite frankly, it isn't probably as accurate as you'd like to think it is. If you go back and you look at wrestling across the board, it's not just Bret Hart's match. Of course, Bret Hart only wants to talk about Bret Hart unless he's criticizing somebody else. But even during Bret's era, although Bret was, and I'll never, be shy to say that I think technically speaking, performance-wise inside of the ring, technically, physically, I think Bret Hart's one of the best in, 2 generations. You can compare him to other people and argue with me if you want, but in my book, technically Bret Hart is one of the best that stepped into the ring during my professional lifetime. That being said, he never really had the charisma or the ability to end up in that Ric Flair, John Cena, Undertaker, Hulk Hogan, Steve Austin kind of category. He was like one notch below, right? And I think that bothers Bret, which is why Bret comes out and talks about this stuff all the time. He's trying to put himself on this pedestal that he never really achieved in terms of being considered one of the greats. Although everybody has respect for him, he just can't seem to go, yeah, in my day things were different, but man, look at some of the stuff these guys are doing, because there's really good stuff going on inside of the ring between the ladies, the stuff that they're doing. And I mean, if you can't find something entertaining in today's product because you're hanging on to what you think in your mind the old style of wrestling used to be, then, sit around, slump in your chair, look like you could just change somebody's oil at Jiffy Lube and complain about everybody else, because evidently that brings joy to Bret.
We're talking about the best of all time, and we're talking about realism and things like that, which I thought was interesting, because in this same interview, Bret points out that he believes Rey Mysterio might actually be the greatest wrestler of all time. He says, when I met Rey Mysterio, I will say this: Rey Mysterio is one of the greatest wrestlers, maybe the greatest wrestler of all time. Nobody can lace Rey Mysterio's shoes up. He was such a great wrestler, a great athlete. He was just so good and such a smart wrestler and so amazing. Maybe when I was in my late 20s, I would have loved to have wrestled Rey Mysterio. By the time I was in WCW, it might have been hard for me to do the kind of match I would have loved to have had with Rey Mysterio. I think that's interesting, because on the one hand, it feels like he's complaining about the modern style of wrestling, but it feels like a lot of the modern style of wrestling was influenced by Rey Mysterio. But I mean, listen, I could make the argument that Rey is one of the greatest of all time. What say you?
I've said it before on this show and on others. I think Rey Mysterio is as close to being a cultural icon as you can be. I give this example, I mean, I think Rey Mysterio, not just Rey, I want to be clear about this, but Rey is the face of the luchadors and what the luchador influence has had on American professional wrestling and American culture. It's not just wrestling. When I refer to Rey as, in a sort, a cultural icon, I'm sure people that are outside of wrestling right now would roll their eyes and go, what are you talking about? Well, if you look at the influence on film, in television, of Lucha Libre, it's seeped into our culture. And not just because of Rey, but without question, that whole, the Lucha influence in the United States owes a debt of gratitude to Rey Mysterio, because he was such a phenomenal performer that it was easy to shine a spotlight on that style of wrestling. Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko, Chris Benoit, a lot of the luchadors that we brought in from Mexico, a lot of the Japanese that we brought over on a regular basis, a consistent basis, to compete in that cruiserweight division, I think shaped this industry, led by Rey Mysterio in many ways, shaped this industry and will have shaped it for decades to come. The lucha influence, if you really look at how, not just in the lucha style matches or in, the smaller, I'll always call them cruiserweights, but I'm talking about the smaller, faster guys and gals. That style will always be there, and it will continue to evolve, but it would not ever have gotten started if it weren't for guys like Rey Mysterio and Eddie and Dean and Chris, and bringing it to the forefront and making it cool.
I promise we're going to get to Raven's Flog, but we have one more piece of business that I've got to address with this Bret Hart interview. I don't know if you've seen this. I know you've been traveling, but boy, he got everybody stirred up.
Who's he talking about now? What a miserable man.
Bret has said that Vince McMahon and Shawn Michaels were lovers. Shawn was so envious and jealous of my position that he finally had to sleep with Vince to get it. I would say it to Shawn if he was here right now. I'd like to have Shawn come clean and say we were lovers.
This is getting to be clinical. I mean,
don't you hope that's a joke? Don't you hope he's just trying to be funny?
First of all, I don't think Bret Hart has the ability to be funny. And maybe he is at times, but I've never seen it. Humor is not something that pops into my head when I think of Bret Hart. No, I don't think he was being funny. I think he's being bitter. And the reason I feel that way is because of everything that we've heard out of Bret Hart for the last couple of years. When I talk about a guy who's just hanging on, I just talked about it. He's hanging on to this perception of him as the greatest there ever was. And not only a Canadian hero, which is whatever, but like a cultural hero of some sort. Dude, you were never that popular as a professional wrestler. You were over it. You sold a lot of stuff. You made a lot of money. But if you go back and you look at the revenue that WWE was reporting during the years you were champion, Bret, wasn't a pretty picture. Now, you can blame it on other people, and you can blame it on things that were outside of anybody's control, the economy or the steroid trial or whatever. You can blame it on all that stuff. Facts are facts, numbers are numbers. You just never got there. But you got so close. Why can't you just enjoy that as opposed to constantly, week after week after week, just burying people and making sure that you compare yourself and your virtues in your career to someone that you're shitting on? I don't know, man. It's just so bitter. Like I said, I'm not joking. I think it's like clinical. If I was somewhere close to Bret, or someone close to Bret, I'd suggest maybe go see a therapist or talk to somebody and just leave that baggage behind. Your life will be way better if you do.
Booker T obviously has a podcast and a radio show, and I think he felt the need to address some of Bret Hart's statements that had the IWC buzzing. And he said something like, "I just refuse to give these podcasters shoot interviews about what went on with me and my peers and stories that happened inside that locker room. You're not going to hear too many of those stories from me. People have tried and tried and tried to get me to talk about Batista and tried to get me to say anything negative about Batista. And I'm like, man, I'm not going to say anything negative about Batista. This is a guy that him and I had a deal, a disagreement, and disagreements with people happen all the time. You settle your differences like a man and you move on." I thought that was a hell of a statement. I don't know how you can't love Booker T, right?
And respect. And,
yeah.
And that's, I mean, it's hard to love somebody if you don't respect them first. And I have a ton of respect for Booker T. And what a contrast. You've got bitter Bret over here who tours the world pissing on everybody he can, so he's got something to talk about other than how great he was, which he eventually will get to anyway. And then you've got Booker T, who's, 180 degrees, because he's had a great career. He probably wishes at certain points things he would have had different opportunities, but Booker T is a perfect example of making the most out of the opportunities that you have. Look at where he is right now. I don't know what he's making. I'm guaranteeing you it's close to a fortune, and he's been doing it for a long time. When I say fortune, it's relative, of course, but I'm sure he's in the upper 1% of income earners in the United States easily, and happy. You see Booker anywhere. You see him at a convention from across the room. There could be 300 yards away with people in between you and him, and you can not only see him laughing, you can hear him laughing across the arena because he enjoys life, as opposed to sitting slumped over in a chair looking like a freaking wino, pissing on people that help make you and help create the opportunity for you to make the living that you're so miserable about. I don't know. That kind of shit just drives me crazy, actually. I just don't know why. What is the why behind that? Why would you choose to wake up being that way? Talking about Bret. Whereas Booker, I aspire to wake up with an attitude like Booker's. I think it's nothing but respect for Booker.
Did you put Christmas on a credit card? Don't stress out about that extra holiday spending. SaveWithConrad.com can help you consolidate all of your high interest rate credit cards into one much lower monthly payment. SaveWithConrad.com has helped families just like yours save up to $800 a month. You don't need perfect credit or money out of your pocket. And did I mention no payments until March? So don't make saving money a resolution next year. Make it happen today at SaveWithConrad.com.
NMLS number 2129, Equal Housing Lender.